You've always got to have young people around you because they don't have the scars. I think that talks very much to the kind of thread that you're on, which is so true, is that you have to have fresh views. You have to have the enthusiastic individuals in the organization that can feel like they're having an impact.
Yes, and because fresh views, wonderful, but what a sad affair that scars cannot be unpacked to figure out what wisdom lies in it, right? Because those scars are there for a reason. Those scars are probably there because people are subjected to a power differential that they couldn't escape, and they couldn't process their insights into meaningful change. It's interesting. I think pain and scars are a wonderful motivator for change. They're usually very poor for building anything, but we need to unpack it and give it space to figure out what wisdom lies in it so that we can move from pain to energy that's actually building and contributing. We have no capacity to get the wisdom out of your pain, and thus we're just going to replenish our workforce. I think that's a painful solution. I think it's also needed, right? Well, let's get all those new insights and refreshment, but not only that.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Ways to Wealth. Today I'm joined by Joost. Joost, why don't you give us the TLDR on who you are and what you're up to?
Awesome. Joost Schouten, born and raised in Holland, living in New Zealand with my wife and two kids. And I am the co-founder of Nestor.io, and we build collaboration software for tomorrow's organizations. And I think today we can take some time to explore what does tomorrow's organizations mean and how does that change from today's organizations.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm looking forward to diving into deep into some of those topics around, kind of managing modern teams, giving people autonomy and accountability within organizations to have the best impact. I was definitely one of the early listeners and readers of all the books that came around kind of organizational hierarchy and flat organizations. And that was kind of like the eminence of this movement. But now we've obviously seen real and forced application of distributed teams. But I guess I wanted to first start with, how do you get to that point? And I know that it's actually quite clear based on your history, how you actually have landed in this space. But do you want to give us a bit of a background on kind of what some of those catalysts were for why you're working and really interested in this space, and perhaps some of the experience you gathered during your career that kind of led to that?
Yeah, nice question. And to me, there's really two very clear catalyst moments in my career and life, because in the end, they're deeply personal, that led me down this path. And the first one is when I came straight out of uni. I'm an engineer by trade. I started working in the States with General Electric, and there I got exposed to what big corporate looks like and the tremendous impact you can make, but also the tremendous theatrics that show up in the hierarchy. I was really confused by that. I thought, what the hell is this? Why are we all laughing at stupid jokes just because they're higher up in the hierarchy? And don't get me wrong, I think General Electric is an amazing company, it has a lot going for it, but it got me thinking about management hierarchy and power over relationships in general. And I thought, I don't like it, I don't want it, and I think we can do better. Because what I noticed is that at the end of the quarter, when there's a problem, all finger pointing starts, and finger pointing upwards doesn't hold any authority. So the finger pointing downwards, management speaking to the employees not delivering enough, is always the argument that wins the day. And that seemed painful and unneeded for me. So I thought, hey, let me go build software that actually brings management information to the work floor, so that before the problems arise, people on the work floor have all the information to actually act, and then kumbaya, everything is solved. So that's what I did. I resigned, bought a laptop and a book on programming, started building software to bring that information to the work floor, build a functioning business out of it, and I didn't solve the problem. I did learn a lot. But in those years, I did learn a lot around how organizations work, and slowly but surely I realized that information is not sufficient. The problems really arise from uneven authority structures, and as a result, uneven voice in decisions being made. So that was step one. So that's really got me going into entrepreneurship and organizational design. What are the challenges there? Fast forward 10 years, we got an investor on board, and we got a deal with them. And 2 years down the track, they didn't deliver on their part of the deal. but they kind of said, screw you, we're not going to do anything about it, and sue us if you want to. We're going to stick to our guns and not honor the contract, which triggered all sorts of integrity issues. And again was really strong catalyst around authority structures, but then at a larger scale of shareholdership and ownership. And what it led me to do is actually feel a bit annoyed and actually thought, well, screw that, I don't want to be part of that, and started to look what further afield, what's out there. And started focusing more on ownership structures and incentive structures, and shift my focus on how can we help organizations that are really explicit about eliminating personal interest, ruling the day in organizational operational decisions, and hereby operate like the personal interest of shareholders, or the personal interest of board members, or the personal interest of CEOs and managers. Those are wonderful and really important personal interests to them personally that shouldn't dictate what the organization does. And that led me to the field of self-organization, distributed authority, and all the experimentation that's been happening in that field for decades, if not centuries. There's a couple of really interesting historical threads to follow there as well. And it also led me to actually step out of my first SaaS operationally and really start a new B2B SaaS product that's now Nestor.io, to serve organizations that have explicitly chosen to make decisions differently and facilitate them both with software for governance as well as software for the operation, because both are tremendously important to make effective decisions that serve that organization at all times. So that's really the overall view as how I landed here.
Yeah, that's cool. Would you say you were always entrepreneurial? Did you always think, like, when you were kind of at GE and you're making your way through, obviously there were a few, basically the way I describe it is that it seems like you had a bunch of technical, more systems driven parts of your career through education into your first kind of, trimester of your career. And then, you were then looking at how that actually, you moved and pivoted into organizational structure before getting here. So, early, prior to your education, did you think, I am going to start something in the future? Like, did you always know that?
No, actually the opposite. I remember during my studies telling my study buddy explicitly, I'm never going to start a business. That seems dumb to me. So that my driver was never to be an entrepreneur or to start a business. My driver, I think, was really personal curiosity, and then through that process, like the frustration of not being able to act on that curiosity within the confines of an organization. So it was more the necessity, okay, well then I'll have to do it myself, rather than really I want to start my own business. And it actually, I remember maybe like 3 or 4 years after having started a business, that I had the realization, this probably means that I'm an entrepreneur. So it was more, just curiosity led and necessity led than I really had an idea. I want to be a business owner.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's quite fascinating when you think about how to motivate small teams, how to give them the autonomy and power to do the things that you would love them to do for the organization and help them do that. And then obviously motivating people to act, and how people's motivations may be different from your own motivations. And you need to, think about, okay, well, how do I learn to tug and to learn what's important to this person? Interestingly, I started a gaming business in 2017. We grew that very quickly to over 400,000 users in 18 months. And we were distributed from day one. We were fully remote. We were in Panama, Argentina, New Zealand, of course, the UK. And the user base was completely global too, because of the nature of gaming and esports. And that was the foray into, that was my first foray into real management outside of World of Warcraft guilds and esports teams when I was playing professionally, which actually prepared me very much quite well actually for that side now. And then that really actually helped us when we moved into the pandemic and we were starting Eccuity and Medition, which is the holding company, because I already had a test run, and I just got lucky that then this was the real one in terms of distributed workforces. Yeah. And then we started thinking about, okay, because our vision for our company is that we believe that everyone has the right to build wealth for themselves and have the freedom to choose how they get there. And that freedom to choose how they get there is really key for entrepreneurs and high agency individuals, because the path is not the same and it's quite nuanced. And that also is applicable accountable for when you're trying to build a team, because you're trying to work out how they're going to get to their end destination while the organization is also on the path to its ideal destination. How have you found like really grasping within Nesta, perhaps even in the functionality of motivations? Because that's always something that I've been a little bit perplexed with both what people say and what really motivates them as well. I think that we all can be guilty of saying what we think we should want rather than saying what we really want.
Yeah, wow. There's actually a whole lot to unpack there. So, but let me try, because let me start with, I think when you are struggling with that problem, you're looking at a symptom, not the problem. Like if motivation is a problem, you will already see a power differential that is leading to that motivation difference, right? So if you feel accountable for motivating people, you shouldn't be there. Like that,
right.
That is a problem in and of itself, right? Now, if you are really going to untangle that, you will have to undo employment and authority tied to ownership. So then you're really starting to pull a thread where you're going to have some really big conversations around how is your organization structured, and do we even have the freedom to untangle that, or can we even legally do so? But I do want to call it out because it's crucial in this exploration, because once you start pulling that thread, that is where you will end up. You will end up looking at employment structures. How do we hire? How do we fire? How do we do compensation? How is authority tied to organizational ownership? Because all those things, employment, compensation, ownership, with those in place, you will always have a parent-child relationship. And with a parent-child relationship, the parent will feel to an extent accountable or responsible for motivating their team. It even is in the language, right? My team. How do I motivate my people? They're not your people. We have just kind of adopted this idea that management hierarchy is the norm, but it's really limiting lots and lots of fruitful, productive expression of everyone showing up, serving the organization's purpose. I hope I'm not going too far out, but I think that is really what I'm interested in, because if you there's lots of patches you can do around motivation, but I think they're all patches. You need to look at authority structures and then actually give somebody the freedom to join the organization based on, are you motivated by the impact that we're making here as an organization or not? And if you are not motivated, you shouldn't be there, right? Yeah. Open the door as wide as you can. Say, wonderful, this is what we're doing. This is what we're serving, and we are going to be ridiculously effective at doing that. And if you are not willing to contribute to that, wonderful, you're a great person, but probably your skill set is not best suited here. So, but if you know, the immediate challenge is people are employed, they get their income, and then it's sometimes quite hard to leave. So it does require somebody with a very high risk tolerance to step out of an organization that has a cushiony employment. But I do think those are the conversations you need to have. So and maybe to apply that to Nestor, what we do, we have no employment in Nestor. We are all partners, and we have a transparent compensation plan where as soon as we, especially in the startup phase, now we are a little bit further down the track, but in the early startup phase, we didn't have enough cash, and that meant that you will get fully compensated for what you're worth, and everybody knows what everybody earns, but that is in stock options if we don't have the cash. And if that doesn't work for you, then now is not the time to show up, because we simply don't have the money. And the idea of that is that we can't go bankrupt. We call that a perpetual treasury, which is wonderful for the organization because the organization will survive at all times. But it also means that everybody shows up equally, not the same, because some people showed up earlier, took more risk, and are rewarded more for that. Well, the same authority structures apply to all of us. And that really changes the game. And it really changes this idea of motivation, because if you carry risk, if you carry reward, then you will have to be motivated. So I think that is really, when you start talking about motivation, something to look into, because you can't motivate people that are intrinsically not motivated. Then you fall into that trap of people start playing the game and lying to you, saying, oh yeah, I'm kind of motivated, just because the alternative you're not going to admit to, because the consequences that you'll have to leave.
Yeah, the consequence of transparency in that dynamic is very difficult. And most people would not be able to even consider being transparent, unfortunately, just because of circumstance and kind of the life and the world that we live in today. And really any day, I think that we do talk a lot about how today is much harder and, with all the extra costs, it is very difficult. But, really throughout history, fragility is fraught in almost every circumstance. And I think we sometimes forget that, right? That like 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 10 years ago, a lot of these fragilities existed. Companies could go out of business, incomes and businesses could have to change how their structure is, etc. I think that's really cool. I liked how you talked about kind of first things first was the cash, and then you guys had some sort of mechanism to basically increase or decrease your burn based on your financial situation, which is really interesting. I think that's something I'm quite fascinated with. Like all of our team have equity and skin in the game. We have a portfolio of subsidiary companies where we have an interest, where we've added value through tech, capital, governance, networks, etc. And and we found around that it's not a motivation thing. It is a hierarchical. It's not even hierarchical. It is a hierarchical dynamic, because in the smaller interests we've got, the more minority interests we've got, it's either worked and been very short engagement, but the team that we've backed in that circumstance, if they're very good, they don't actually need us for long. And then all the bad ones, or all the ones that are minority, but they're not executing, or their team is not in the same kind of realm as, the other teams, or what our expectation would be, then there's a whole lot of time and effort going into minority interests where we have a very little impact on actually the direction, because we're a minority interest. Now, and my goal or our team's goal specifically was, and it was my fault in a sense, because it was my thesis, was that, we don't really necessarily want to be operating because we've got eccuity, and that's such a big piece, was that we would help, but with minority interests, so the founders had more impact. What we found is that if they're great and they've got good product market fit, etc., and they're on a good trajectory, the engagement is actually short-lived, and we help them kind of turbocharge, and then we're gone, because they already know what they're doing. And then, like I said, with the ones that are not so prosperous, we have less ability to actually move the needle. So what we found is actually we are now going bigger, and we are going more concentrated into more even equity relationships with the other party that we're trying to back. And that's having far better results so far.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think, again, that's like you're patching a symptom in the end by saying, hey, we can't process relevant tensions we hold because we have a minority stake, right? So what you're identifying there is that voting is a terrible way to make an operational decision, right? So here's an expert with a lot of experience stepping in, regardless of how much shares they have in an organization. You should be able to process that insight into meaningful change, because what you're in effect seeing is that if you have a minority stake, it doesn't matter how much you know about the expertise you bring in. If an ignorant majority says it's not relevant, it's not relevant. So what you're highlighting there is the decision-making process sucks. The decision-making process of voting from a minority stake is really a poor way to make a decision. It's better than only an authoritarian regime, but it's, most organizations to an extent are authoritarian regimes to some extent with some checks and balances. That is not good enough. And there's so much, like over the last decades and centuries, like I said before, there's so many alternative ways to structure yourself that don't fall victim to ignorant majority rule, but really make sure that there is a wonderful way for all relevant input to be processed into meaningful change in pursuit of organizational purpose. It's such a shame that we don't do that at scale yet. And that's why I do this work, is I am deeply passionate to help organizations be reflective of serving our collective needs rather than just serving the individual needs of a few individual shareholders. That's not to say that those individual shareholders shouldn't be rewarded for the risk that they've taken. That is wonderful. We should reward that. We should reward that financially and with impact, but not to the extent where excessive discrepancies show up, where the majority of people impacted by what that organization does are harmfully impacted by that organization, either by a wealth gap or, I don't know, environmental impact or just poor organizational decision making, whatever that might be. We should all be able to process our relevant insights into meaningful change within that organization, regardless of your ownership stake or your managerial position. And so there are, like in self-organization and distributed authority, there's many different patterns to use that. And any organization would want that, because what it means is, like if you're driving your car and there's a little warning light showing up, if you ignore that warning light, you might get stranded on the side of the road at a time when there's no help. Whereas if you listen to that warning light, like that is the majority rule overruling the minority that says, hey, there's a problem here. We should listen to that warning light. And in organizations, it's no different. If somebody at the production line says, hey, hold on a second, this is not working, everything is about to fall apart, we should listen to that. And not because we give them authority or we can veto that in the managerial hierarchy. No, because they have that intrinsic authority to act because we trust their expertise. And our current management hierarchy and ownership structures are really limiting our ability to process our insights into making this organization more effective and allow it to actually make more efficient and effective impact in the short, mid, and long term.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one. Like, have you looked much at Berkshire and, what they've done there with all their different companies, and obviously, but it's very much a hierarchical system, right? Because you have kind of one superpower, yet obviously there's something going on there where there's a collaboration. If you think about the early partnership into buying Berkshire and how that kind of same shareholder care has kind of gone through for 30 odd years or whatever, maybe longer than that, yet very hierarchical in a sense that they kind of had two key operators there that clearly had all the influence. Can you talk about dynamics where you do have very powerful individuals, like even myself in my own organization, there's a disproportionate power between me and basically any other individual player, yet I can still make poor decisions, I can still misread things, but also I have the most to lose in a sense.
Again, there's a couple of interesting things. First of all, I think a management hierarchy can function really, really well. I think the past couple of centuries show that it can, and that is wonderful. So it's really not railing against the management hierarchy per se, but just saying, hey, in today's world where things shift so fast, you can't possibly expect an individual management hierarchy to really hold the complexity of today's organization. So you have to start relying on the insights of everyone within the organization. But that doesn't mean everything becomes a vote and everyone needs to know everything, because that's simply not going to work. We just need to get really clear and explicit on, hey, what roles and expertise is needed to serve this organization, get really clear on that, and then find the right person with that and actually set them free. Say, hey, this is what is expected of you. Go for it. Do it fully transparent so that if anyone sees harm or harm arises, we can instantly fix it. But we don't need to have veto powers or approval processes. I think that's one thing. And that also speaks to that idea of, so it's not making an organization into a democracy, because voting, again, is a really poor way to make an operational decision. It's distributing authority to those experts that know what they're doing so that you can trust for them to pick it up. And as long as that's done transparently and we see the impact, we can instantly act when harm arises rather than trying to prevent it. Because that's kind of the shift we're speaking to, right? Moving from predict and control, that is the management hierarchy, to sense and respond. That is one of the biggest paradigm shifts that needs to happen in organizations, if you ask me. Because management hierarchy, with its fear that comes with it, the bigger the organization, the more risk averse it becomes, right? Because what you're going to do is, your personal interest of promotion, keeping your job, getting a raise, are mostly impacted by making a mistake. Like, you might not get that if you make a mistake. So what are you going to do? Make as little decisions as you can so that you don't make a mistake. where the organization wants to see as many experiments as you can so that we can figure out what works and move forward. And along the process, that many experiments don't work. But we incentivize against that through the management hierarchy. To your decision, you still want to make a lot of decisions, and you should, because you probably, if you were to unpack all your work into clear and explicit roles, you will probably hold the most roles within your organization compared to your peers, and with that comes the most authority. But then all of a sudden we've made that explicit, and we can.
It's a context score.
Yes.
It's so, you have your ownership score and you have your context score almost within any problem, decision, issue that arises. And then that gives you could have quite a simple algorithm to basically work out what that means on a weighted basis. Some of this principle also reminds me, one thing I really like about markets and public market experts that have run hedge funds and manage money is that the feedback loop is quite true, right? And Druckenmiller, one of the greatest hedge funds managers of all time, he talks about a couple of things that I think are really pertinent here, which is one, that he's now learned, because the world moves in such a fast pace, and we're seeing that now with AI and in the software development space, right? Clear as day. But he now has this thing around invest and then investigate, which basically talks to when you have this feedback loop, sometimes you don't have time to appropriately investigate, which kind of in the context of maybe money management would be, let's say, an investment committee. I'm not going to rebalance until the next quarter's investment committee meeting, for example, because that is our process. Whereas again, that's the investigation side. Sometimes action needs to be taken much faster. So I thought that was quite interesting. And then also another one, given again, the results are so clear, right? With you kind of, in a lot of these organizations, the feedback loop is different. It, like you say, it's all about not making mistakes, and even money management is similar. But the other piece was that you've always got to have young people around you because they don't have the scars. And I think that talks very much to the kind of thread that you're on, which is so true, is that, you have to have fresh views. You have to have the enthusiastic individuals in the organization that can feel like they're having an impact.
Yes, and because fresh view is wonderful, but what a sad affair that scars cannot be unpacked to figure out what wisdom lies in it, right? Because those scars are there for a reason. Those scars are probably there because people are subjected to a power differential that they couldn't escape, and they couldn't process their insight into meaningful change. And process their insight into meaningful change might have mean leave the organization and go somewhere else or start your own. But they're all really, really relevant. And I find it's interesting. I think pain and scars are a wonderful motivator for change. They're usually very poor for building anything, but we need to unpack it and give it space to figure out what wisdom lies in it so that we can move from pain to an energy that's actually building and contributing. Because in the statement you made earlier also lies this idea, we have no capacity to get the wisdom out of your pain, and thus we're just going to replenish our workforce. I think that's a painful solution. I think it's also needed, right? Well, let's get all those new insights and refreshment, but not only that.
Yeah, for sure. So the blockchain space is an interesting one because it talks to the ideals of democratic situation, right? Yes. And it talks about, can we have better governance? But of course, in practice, governance is a human issue, not a systems issue often, and not a technology issue. Yeah. So have you seen any DAOs work? And it's an interesting one because actually, of course, a DAO should work because all you need is the right group of people. So
I've been part of a DAO for a year and a half. So a couple of years ago, I got invited to join a DAO to help them with their self-organization and governance processes, which was a really wonderful experience. Learned a lot. So the short answer is yes, I have seen some DAOs work. And those are pretty much exclusively the DeFi DAOs that do a very simple thing, and that is transact and find the optimal price. So when the question is really easy, and it's not really easy, but it's just really transacting, finding a market price, it's quite easy, and that works really well. Whenever the question is more complex and requires building a product or offering a service, I have not seen many DAOs do that well. And the DAOs that function and do manage to deliver a product is, in my opinion, more in spite of the DAO than because of the DAO. right? So, and a DAO, I think, is a wrong name because the sum of the characteristics of a blockchain-based operational system doesn't make up an organization, right? So it does a little bit about compensation, governance tokens, and membership to an extent, and sometimes operational decision making. But like I said before, voting, I think, is a very poor way to make operational decisions when the decisions are more complex and require expertise in a certain area. I don't want everyone in my organization to have a say in what database to choose. No, I want my experts that know about databases to make that decision by themselves. and all the other input, cool, they should be able to ignore. If we're going to start voting, you will have a very risk-averse organization that is going to do dumb stuff. So as one should take the voting mechanism, even very clever voting mechanisms, to the operation, I think you're using the wrong tool for the job. Where I think DAOs can be very helpful is in the separation of ownership and authority structures. So most DAOs, like you say, they equate them. You can buy a token and that becomes your voting rights. And thus we have replicated all the challenges of shareholdership. You can just buy sufficient shares and hijack the organization. DAOs primarily are all the same. The DAO that I contribute to, I chose to contribute to it because they actually separated those two out. There is a difference in an investment stake, financial risk and reward, and an operational authority token that you only earn through contribution over time. And I think that is a really interesting exercise. And if some of the challenges I faced in that experiment is that in the end, I think my conclusion, and the jury's still out, right? But I chose to leave at one point when I realized I couldn't make any impact anymore, because in my opinion, the DAO had prematurely decentralized, right? It was already risk averse. It could not effectively make any decisions in any area of expertise anymore because everyone had a vote in that. That might not necessarily have so much of expertise in that area. So that's my take. I haven't seen many DAOs effectively operationalize complex product development or service delivery.
Yeah, because I've been thinking about this kind of topic quite a lot recently around that operational authority. And I was kind of thinking, well, in a sense, I compete and train in jiu-jitsu. I'm a brown belt at the moment. And I kind of started thinking, like, I wonder if almost we have a belt system within our organization. So someone that is a support staff, or let's say a customer implementation manager or something, just because their role might be subservient to the head of BD doesn't mean that they are, from a cultural or a context perspective, less informed or less capable for specific things. And I was thinking about almost like a belt system within, right, where you could actually have one of the lower ranks in the organization be a black belt. And what it means to be a black belt, right, is you understand the fabric of the culture of the organization and what we expect, and you basically demonstrate those dynamics. And I think this is quite closely connected to this operational layer versus ownership layer.
Yeah, I love that exploration, and I would urge you to have a look at a couple of systems that have been experimenting with this for decades. So look up sociocracy or holacracy or teal practices. The book Reinventing Organizations by Frederic Laloux speaks to some of this. And what it in effect says is differentiating between role and soul, between role and person, right? So as a person, I have a bunch of skills, but as a person, I don't have authority. As a person, I show up with filling roles and have a portfolio of roles that give me authority to show up in the organization. And those roles can be taken away through a clear process or through another role holder that has the clear authority to give and take away roles. And then all of a sudden it gets really explicit. And the wonderful part of that as well is if then we all have a pathway to impact and change the governance, the shape and structure of these roles, all of a sudden, we are fully free to suggest changes. Say, hey, I am subjected to a process by which I can take him in and out of this role. I want to suggest a change for that. Like internally with Nestor, we do that with our compensation. Our compensation is transparent and rooted in the governance methodology that can be changed and by anyone. And that is so powerful. That also instantly contributes to that undoing that parent-child relationship so that we can show up as adults and contribute fully to our shared organization.
Like, what do you think about the next 5 years for you? Like, what would success look like in 5 years from now? The world is changing. The way our organizations breathe and exist is changing. We're seeing a really clear hollowing out of certain layers of organizations that is happening in real time. And we also have a burst of creativity within organizations from individuals that are innovating with AI and trying to expand the scope of their capabilities by basically utilizing these new tools, even though maybe the fundamental educational path was, wasn't there. So, the way that organizations are going to look in 10 years from today is going to be extremely different, and even in 5 years will be quite different. So what do you think for you personally over the next 5 years? And then I guess where do you see team dynamics sitting?
Geez, that's a big question. There's a lot of ways to go there. But for me personally, I just hope to stay on this trajectory of doing work I am intrinsically motivated to do, and that really is aligned with what I'm doing today. Support organizations to be effectuating our collective needs rather than just individual needs. How can we help organizations make an impact, and everyone that contributes to that organization and is affected by that organization has a say in that impact and can actually alter the course if that causes harm in some shape or form. And then my chosen strategy is self-organization and software supporting organizations that practice that. I'm deeply passionate about that, and if I can continue that's wonderful. And of course, I hope for growth, both in impact as in revenue, because they're aligned. And by the way, if your revenue and impact is not aligned, you've got a really massive operational issue on your hands. Look at a Facebook, for example, where they are not directly serving their users. Their users are a resource to them.
Or their product.
Then for AI specifically, I'm worried. I'm worried about the AI impact, because I think history shows that productivity increase benefits those that hold authority and resources today at the cost of those that don't. And that's going to, I think, be exacerbated by AI and have massively disruptive effect on society that I don't see us mitigating in any shape or form fast enough.
I don't think you can get a free market to stop it.
No.
That's I was talking about this yesterday. We were discussing that, I guess I'm naturally driven to try and I guess one of my biggest weaknesses is that I am actually seduced by contrarian views, but I don't know if it's applicable. But what I'd say is, obviously we're in a world now, personally or professionally, where there's a whole lot of noise, and you're trying to find the signal in that noise. And I think that's the same thing with this now, a relentless mindset to deliver more. Oh, well, we now have intelligence in a box, and as long as I've got more compute, I can produce more units of productivity. Therefore, I am superior. And I think human nature, unfortunately, would lead me to believe that there's no way that you undo Pandora's box has been opened, and no one's going to slow down. Now, I think the contrarian view is, okay, well, fine, that is the zeitgeist, but actually, it's not about how many units of productivity you get. It's how many units of useful and relevant units of productivity you get. So I do think the contrarian view might be actually you slow down. But also I would say that beyond that, technology then and functionality becomes subservient because it's so much cheaper to deliver. And it's frameworks and principles that are going to deliver long-term moats for businesses. That's my current view on that space. And it gives me a lot of concern and actually, in a way, a lot of optimism to how we're designing our own organizations. And having been involved in grassroots organizations and grassroots activities for pretty much my entire life, I think that that's how you have real impact, is by not necessarily virtue signaling ideals that you can't execute, but actually at a grassroots level, going in and being able to have the maximum amount of impact positively on people in your network, in your circle, right? I think that's how you have real impact.
I think that's so relevant, because I see many communities or people come together that really, with the right intent, try to achieve something and never really manage to escape the discussion trap, where it's always a conversation on what a wonderful world would look like, and the action doesn't necessarily follow. But also, relevant and wonderful, but not my context. I want to do something and really try it out and experiment. And I feel a really strong urge to do the work we're doing, especially right now, because I think there is a real big case to be made for purpose-driven work by means of self-organization and distributed authority, so that we can hold the organization to account, but also the AI deployed and employed by that organization to account. Right. So because right now AI deployed will just use societal biases of growth at all costs. Whereas
whoever wrote the code, right? If you're actually delegating AI to take a function of your business, just be aware that it was programmed by a bunch of people in Silicon Valley that are mid-20s and have very specific views and worldviews and how they've designed it. Yes. And the context that it's been trained on, depending on the organization and the model, is going to impact it. So you're very right there.
Yeah. And the wonderful thing with organizations that move away from management hierarchy and replace it with role-based work is that you have explicit governance, and AI is wonderfully good at understanding explicit governance. So within Nestor, for example, we have an AI bot that's bound by your organizational governance, and it actually fully understands the role you fill while you ask it stuff. So then all of a sudden, purpose becomes the boundary for AI to function within. And it's actually wonderful when you run an experiment. You ask a bot a question of, hey, what's the quickest way to start a business? And it will give you some sort of drop shipping example that isn't, if you ask me, detrimental to, not necessarily very functionally improving to society. Whereas if you preface that with explicit purpose or your own values, all of a sudden the answers you get are very different and rooted in your morals and your ethics in a way that I think is deeply important. So I feel urgency to do more of that and less of drop shipping.
Awesome. Wicked. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on the pod. I really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot and it's been a fun convo. So thank you so much.
It's been a
appreciate
pleasure.
it. Awesome. Thank you so much.